Hello. This video is about a romance that started over 60 years ago when my parents met at the University of Massachusetts. Over 60 years ago when my parents got married, they promised to be with each other through sickness and health. In this video, you can see that my mother is in her early stages of dementia. She has forgotten a lot about her past, but fortunately my father still has a sharp memory. Now, fast forward to April 2020. We're in the midst of the coronavirus pandemic, and the memory care house where my mother now has to live because of her now advanced dementia was ordered closed by the governor of Maryland to protect them. My father had to make the difficult decision to either move in and stay locked into the memory care house with dementia care patients, or stay home and not see my mother for maybe for months and maybe to the rest of her life. My father made the difficult decision to move in with her. So today he's in the memory care center, locked in the house with her. That just goes to show just one example of the commitment they have had to each other. So I hope you enjoy seeing the beginnings of this romance that produced such commitment. Thank you for watching. I talk about when you two met. What year?
What year?
Were you a junior or sophomore? I guess
Eileen
was
a junior, and I was a sophomore. And I've told the story 100 times, but
we'll tell it again. Yes.
That the boys at end of classes, their dorms were way up on the hill, and rather than going all the way back for supper, they stayed down at the at the cafeteria, and there would be a long bench you would normally see in a cafeteria, and the guys would sit on it and talk. And on the opposite side of the double doors going into the cafeteria was another bench, and the girls would gather over there. And there'd be some communication because some of them knew each other or dated, but not much. And the girls were always playing a card game called Hearts. But there was one girl wasn't. She was reading a book. And one day I wandered over where the girls were and came up behind this girl who wasn't a card shark. And I saw she was reading a poetry book. And I said, "Oh, are you a poetry major?" And she said, "No, I'm a biology major." And I said, "Oh, if we ever see each other again, I'm going to call you poetry major." And that is sort of how I initially met Mom.
So what did you think of Dad when he came by?
She doesn't. I don't think she remembers.
You don't remember?
I don't remember much.
Yeah, but we didn't have too much contact until, here again, the old story that was over at the library. The main library hall was a big social thing, a lot of noise going on, some studying, but I was in academic pressure, shall we say, and so I had to find a place that was quiet to study, and I knew that downstairs in the basement area, along one wall, there was a row of tables for studying, and I went down there and I saw Eileen, my poetry major, studying also, so I got beside her and talked a little bit, and that's at one point, whether this was more than one occasion, I'm not sure, the first one, that to relax you took off your shoes to study, because you study for several hours. And that's when I let my toes go walking towards her foot. And she was not very happy with that, and the foot jumped to the side. I kept my foot walking, and she said, "Stop it." And I took my foot away, and then a few minutes later she got up and left. And after about a half hour further studying, I decided to leave. And when I went to leave, I was missing one shoe. And I said, "Oh, great." I really looked around. I said, "She must have taken it." She was angry with me. Well, that day, it was this outside of the campus was snow, it was cold. And I said, "Well, I can't walk with one shoe, I'll really look stupid." So I took off the other shoe and was walking down the stairs of the library. Eileen came out of the side somewhere and said, "Oh, here's where your other shoe is." And I went back and got my shoe.
You remember that, Mom? Being mischievous?
And she said to me, "If you want to go out on a date, just ask me." And
I don't remember that.
yeah, so I did, but back then neither of us had much money. And I think we went to a movie or something or other. But from then on, I didn't stop doing my toes, doing the walking. We both ended up studying together downstairs along that basement. That's how we got to know each other. And at the university, they had musicals and plays, and it was part of your student activity fee. And I think we may have gone, but we didn't have much money for entertaining. And then the following spring, Mom went off with her class on a field trip, an overnight field trip. And that was a small mammal class. And they had to trap small animals. I think they went even into a bat cave. And they had to get specimens to dissect in their classes. And Eileen mentioned she was going, and I said, "Oh, well, who's going on that?" She said, "Well, a bunch of the class." And I said, "Oh, what's the makeup of the class?" She said, "Well, it was about 25 guys and me and this other girl." And I said, "Oh." I wasn't too thrilled with that idea, because they were camping overnight. I guess they provided them with the camping stuff. The instructor was there from the class. And I said, "Well, when are you going to be back?" And I found out, well, about that time I wandered down to her dorm and to find out if she had checked in. And they said no, she hadn't. Well, I went into the lounge area they had you couldn't go up, this was an all-girls dorm, you couldn't go up to their room or anything like that. And I went into the lounge. About an hour later I wandered out, said, "They still haven't come in?" They said no. Well, after about 3 hours, they finally arrived. And when they arrived, one of the girls said, "Your boyfriend's been frantic about you, not being in. He really must care about you."
Oh.
And that sort of, I don't know how to describe it, that Eileen and I both knew that we cared about each other more than just
Study partners, study.
yeah. But then I was able to cap it off when we would have a break, like winter or Christmas break. Eileen would have to reverse the process. She would have to walk into Amherst, get a bus, go down to Springfield, get another bus that would then maybe go into Boston, and then find a place to stay in Boston. And that's where she would go to the YWCA. Well, I came along, and my friend Kenny had flunked out, so we weren't thumbing on the roads to get home. It was 90 miles. So I saw an ad up on the bulletin board, drive to Boston area, gas money. And that's, I said to Eileen, you want a ride? Yes! And so I arranged the ride with another student, and he would pick us up and immediately go to the gas station
Yeah,
where we would buy gas.
with an empty tank, huh?
And he wasn't on credit,
Yeah.
and he wanted to make sure we had money to pay for gas, which was cheap then.
Yeah.
But he dropped us off in Framingham. He was going a little further on, but not much. And I would then drive Eileen into Boston to the Y. And she would, and made life a lot easier, because on the return, my father would, or my Uncle Art would drive us back. And I would go in first, pick Eileen up, and she had a ride. So I became very useful for Eileen. And
So how, you talked about when you met her parents for the first time. How'd it go with when Mom came and met the family?
well, my mother had died.
Okay.
I wish Eileen had a chance to meet her. I think they would have gotten along fine. I think my father liked Eileen, but I think what they were nervous about was that I'd end up leaving college before graduation.
Yeah.
That something would come up, different things. Could be pregnancy, getting, even getting married
You're getting married, yeah.
was got them spooked. Because they didn't know if I was going to finish college. I mean, it was just, but I think they were very polite to Eileen, receptive. It wasn't until you were born that an issue came up that was probably an underlying, but it was there tension?
Yeah.
I think there probably was, but it was kept very quiet, very in check. Because when you were born, about a couple of, maybe the first time we took you up to Massachusetts, Kathy, who wasn't a heck of a lot older than you, she
Sure.
may have been 8 or 9 or so, said, "Oh, is he baptized?"
Yeah.
And, oh, that's the first time the issue ever came up, and we said no. And people said, "Oh." The conversation, whatever it was, went off in a different direction.
Yeah.
But I think there was probably concern of religious.
Oh, we were married then, before
Yeah.
that.
No, I know that, but I'm just getting married,
Yeah, you're married now, you've been married.
Mhm.
and we're still hearing. It's nothing apparent. The only time it came up was when Kathy said,
Yeah.
"Were you baptized?"
Yeah.
And we said no, which meant I wasn't continuing in the Catholic religious practice. Okay. And I think that was a concern, that marrying a non-Catholic, I've often thought that contrary in Catholicism, it's the women that carry the religion. The men have this image. They think the men are the priests. The men,
Mhm.
they not important, but they're the decision makers in the church. When I think really, whether they realize it or not, it's the women that are more underlying. Now in the Jewish thing, it's also men outside the
Now,
home.
this was after college when
Yeah,
I had
Yes,
the
but
yes,
job.
I'm just
after-
running
after-
parallels.
Yeah.
In the Jewish thing, it's also in the home. Because I asked this other, I can't remember who it was, about that, something or other. And they basically said, okay. Or I said was, well, don't you feel that you have to sit separate from the men behind the screen or in the balcony? And she said, yeah, but in the home, they sit in the balcony and we run the home. And you see that in the meal. The women lead the prayer in the home, at least where I've been exposed to it. And you see that a little bit on the trips. There was a special corner set up, at least when we were now our age, we went on Jewish trips. They would have a corner set up where women had light candles, and the women led the prayers. And the men weren't involved in that at all. And they just mealtime seemed to be more important than the Jewish. Women had a very strong place in the religious life than outside. That's my impression anyway. But going back to when we were in college and getting married, the day before we were to be married, Eileen's parents found out we were getting married.
My
Oh, they
sister,
didn't know?
my sister's,
Told them.
Yeah.
They did not know we were getting married. We did not tell them.
Okay.
They called my father's house and lit into him about this goyim.
Yeah.
Marry their own. Don't marry my Jewish daughter. Just my father never mentioned it till years later. And I don't know how the subject came up, and he said, oh, by the way, Eileen's parents called the day before the wedding and really let me have it about them, your son marrying their daughter. So I mean, it's just as good we didn't.
You didn't know, but yeah. It was good you didn't say anything.
And when we got married, a friend of my father, Paul, his last name was M-O-A-N. He gave Mom away at the wedding. The people there may have thought that was Eileen's father,
Yeah.
but it wasn't. No, Eileen's parents were very, very upset. And it wasn't until you kids came along that things softened, which is not unusual. So we had a rocky start in our marriage as far as Eileen's family was concerned. My father bought us a wedding present of a car.
Oh, wow.
I mean, it was a
Yeah,
second-hand
years ago, wasn't it?
Pontiac. I think it was 7 years old.
Yeah.
And it lasted for about 4 or 5 years down here. The trips back and forth to Massachusetts finally did it in because the roads then were the old Wilbur Cross, which had big hills, and the car at one point barely made it up over the hill, which means the compression in the cylinders were shot. And we finally traded it in. But he gave us a wedding present and helped pull together at Wallace's Diner for about 30 people. We had
30
a
people.
luncheon.
We had a small, about 30 people. Very small.
But it was, we had the restaurant to ourselves. And, well, my father had a lot of friends. And I was still, which led to, the Jewish thing was another funny incident. My father spoke at a lot of different organizations. And one of them was a Jewish veterans group. And there may have been an anti-Semitic incident going on or happened, I don't know, but the question came up. They sort of asked my father, well, what's his view on anti-Semitism? And he said, oh, my son married a Jewish girl. And when he came home, he told that quite proudly. And I'm thinking, Dad, they may not have bought into, they may have not have bought into the marrying as much as my father thought.
Yeah, they may not, yeah.
But my father was almost proud
Yeah.
that he was. He thought he had a good response.
Yeah.
And we lived in a senior year in an apartment off campus, the Garrett apartment, 2 rooms, a big kitchen and another big room, which was the bedroom, the desk, where we lived. And we lived in there for a year. And Mom ended up going to Smith College every day, working as a research assistant, and paid the bills. And that's how we got through my senior year.
His parents didn't give him anything money.
Well, my
Oh,
father was strapped
Yeah.
back then to medical insurance.
Well, you
Wasn't
lost,
as good, and my mother was, for about 3 years, was in and out of the hospital
you had to
having surgery.
raise a large family.
And-
It must have been pretty hard.
And a new family. He had his back against the wall. He was a member of the Elks. He arranged a $250,000 loan from them. And when we came to Washington, he went and co-signed a $200-some-odd loan at a bank. And that was our seed money when we arrived down here, which wasn't much, but here again, you put in the factor of 10.
And you got a job offer.
Yeah,
I
but
had
we
a
didn't
job
get,
offer.
she didn't have one at that point.
Well, I was working with the
And I didn't
college.
realize that we were not gonna get paid for a month. I wouldn't see a paycheck for a month. You
Yeah.
worked 2 weeks, and then you waited 2
2
weeks
weeks,
for
yeah.
the first check. And we were scraping by.
I was working somewhere.
Not then. But you fairly quickly got a job at the National Academy of Sciences. And you started working there, but more important, you had a parking spot
Oh, yeah.
down on the mall, which was on Constitution Avenue, right by the Ellipse.
And people were just,
And
you had a parking place there?
the patent office people, directors and that, had to park in a huge lot, bumper to bumper, in rows, 10 cars deep, and until the first car left, you couldn't leave. And the second car would then leave. If people were late, working late, or just forgot that what time it was, if you parked, you had to be down there at 5 o'clock, because people were behind you waiting to get out, whereas Mom was parked in a spot. We got there, hopped in the car, and drove off. It was like an executive parking spot, and so it was important.